In the fall of 1980, 52 American hostages were still trapped in Tehran, the fallout of a failed revolution, a botched rescue mission, and a wounded American presidency. Every night the country waited. Every day the clock ticked toward November. And then something strange happened. The hostages weren't released, not in September, not in October, not until January 20th, the very hour Ronald Reagan was sworn in as president. Coincidence? Or was something more sinister at play? Tonight, we investigate the rumor that won't die, that Reagan's team struck a secret deal with a hostile foreign government to delay the release of American hostages and win the White House. This is the Midnight Mystery Archive. I'm Kevin, and for the second straight episode, we're delving into political intrigue as we follow the trail of the October Surprise. In 1980, the United States was a nation in crisis. Inflation was skyrocketing, interest rates were in the double digits. And in Iran, 52 American hostages had been held for over a year, paraded in front of cameras by a revolutionary government that refused to negotiate on U.S. terms. President Jimmy Carter was trying and failing to bring them home. His administration had launched a rescue mission, Operation Eagle Claw, which ended in disaster when a sandstorm caused helicopters to crash in the desert. 8 servicemen died. The mission failed, and Carter's approval ratings plummeted. Enter Ronald Reagan, a former actor, former California governor, a man whose campaign was built on strength, clarity, and one very quiet promise that America would never be embarrassed again. But behind the public campaign trail, something else may have been happening. As the election drew closer, speculation grew. Why weren't the hostages being released? And why, after 444 days of captivity, were they suddenly freed at the exact moment Reagan took office? At the time, some called it poetic. Others called it politics. But years later, new allegations would emerge, ones that painted a very different picture. The members of the Reagan campaign, specifically campaign manager William Casey and future Vice President George H.W. Bush, had met with Iranian officials behind the scenes, that they promised Iran a better deal if they held on to the hostages just a little longer. A back-channel betrayal, a secret deal to sway an election, and a question that still haunts historians today. Did Ronald Reagan win the presidency with foreign help before he was ever elected? The core of the October Surprise theory is chillingly simple. That in the summer and fall of 1980, members of Ronald Reagan's campaign met in secret with Iranian officials in Europe, possibly in Madrid, more likely in Paris, and struck a deal. The alleged terms? Delay the release of the hostages until after the election. In return, the Reagan administration, once in power, would quietly deliver weapons to Iran. And according to some, that's exactly what happened. The first whispers came from journalist Robert Perry, who had investigated Iran-Contra in the mid-1980s. In the early 90s, Perry began receiving tips that the Reagan campaign had been involved in a shadowy negotiation before the 1980 election, not unlike the illegal arms for hostages scandal that would later surface in Reagan's presidency. Perry wasn't the only one. Former Iranian President Abul Hassan Banasat claimed publicly that Iranian officials met with Reagan representatives in Paris in October 1980. He claimed he was told by aides that Reagan's campaign had made a promise: no release of hostages before the election. The deal would be honored, Banassad said, because Reagan's team promised future arms sales and non-interference in Iran's affairs. According to multiple sources, the alleged attendees included William Casey, Reagan's campaign manager, George H.W. Bush, though this was never confirmed, several intermediaries with intelligence or diplomatic backgrounds. These meetings were said to have occurred October 18th through 20th, just weeks before the U.S. election. But here's the problem. There's no hard proof, no photos, no travel logs that place either Bush or Casey in Paris. Just eyewitnesses, former intelligence operatives, anonymous tips. One of those voices was Ari Ben-Menashe, a former Israeli intelligence officer who claimed he personally saw Casey in Paris negotiating with Iranian intermediaries. Another was Richard Brennicke, a self-identified CIA contract pilot who also testified he flew participants to the meeting. But Brennicke's credibility was later questioned. In fact, every witness who spoke publicly was either discredited, ignored, or mysteriously changed their story. In 1991, the U.S. Congress opened a formal investigation. The House October Suprise Task Force spent months combing through the claims, interviewing witnesses, reviewing travel records, and examining CIA files. Their final conclusion: there was no credible evidence of a secret deal. William Casey couldn't be placed in Paris. George H.W. Bush was proven to be at public events in Washington, D.C. during the alleged meetings. Case closed. Or was it? Critics of the investigation said it had been rushed, that testimony had been buried, that political pressure, especially from Republicans, had influenced the outcome. And then there was Casey himself. He died in 1987, just as the Iran-Contra scandal was unraveling. He was never directly questioned under oath about October 1980. To this day, his name remains at the center of the mystery. The hostages were released on January 20th, 1981, minutes after Ronald Reagan took the oath of office. The timing was either a stunning coincidence or something more calculated. But if a deal was made, if promises were given to Iran, what came next? What was the payoff? In the years that followed Reagan's inauguration, U.S. foreign policy toward Iran shifted in quiet but telling ways. In 1981, Israeli officials reported that the Reagan administration had approved third-party arms sales to Iran. These were routed through countries like Israel and Saudi Arabia indirectly, but with tacit U.S. support. Missiles, aircraft parts, ammunition. The very supplies Iran needed for its war with Iraq. While the public face of U.S. policy was anti-Iran, behind the curtain, weapons flowed and money moved. The October Suprise theory gained new life in 1986 when the Iran-Contra scandal erupted. The Reagan administration had been illegally selling weapons to Iran and funneling the profits to anti-communist rebels in Nicaragua. The shocking part? The very infrastructure described in the October Suprise theory, secret meetings, shadowy intermediaries, covert deals, was real. This raised a disturbing question. If they were willing to do this in 1985, could they have done something similar in 1980 to win an election? As details emerged from the Iran-Contra hearings, Skeptics of the October surprise theory saw validation. Patterns repeating, names resurfacing, denials sounding too familiar. William Casey again was central to both stories, but by then he was gone, dead, silent, a convenient black hole where answers should have been. Some say Reagan's aggressive foreign policy was simply pragmatic Cold War strategy. Others say it was payback, part of the alleged deal struck in Paris. Iran got weapons, the hostages were released after the election, and Reagan secured a political victory that changed the course of history. Officially, the October surprise never happened. Congress said no, the press said no, Reagan's defenders said no, but many Americans still think otherwise. Why? Because the story feels like it could be true. And in politics, feeling often carries far more weight than actual fact. There's something irresistible about a conspiracy, especially when it fills in gaps left by history. When events seem too perfect, too convenient, we instinctively search for a hidden hand. The hostages released at the exact moment Reagan was sworn in? The key player dying before he could testify? And then, 5 years later, the exact same type of weapons for hostages scandal playing out in Iran-Contra? It's not hard to see why people connect the dots. In some ways, the October surprise has become modern folklore, a parable of distrust in American leadership. Whether or not it happened, it speaks to a deeper truth. The people believe the game is rigged, that our system can be manipulated in back rooms, that power never really changes hands, it's just passed behind closed doors. This isn't unique to Reagan. Similar allegations emerged around the Nixon campaign in 1968. And in later years, people asked if George W. Bush had manipulated war intelligence, if Barack Obama hid elements of his past, if Donald Trump had Russians help before his win, if Joe Biden had late midnight vote surges to win in 2020. In each case, the mystery becomes a mirror, showing us how little we trust the people we vote for. If the October surprise did happen, it was one of the boldest acts of political sabotage in U.S. history. If it didn't, it remains a case study in how rumors can shape national memory. And perhaps the scariest part, that we may never know what happened in that Paris hotel, or if anything happened. Just as we may never know how many of our greatest moments were quietly bought in the dark. I'm Kevin, and this has been another episode of the Midnight Mystery Archive. Join us next time as we unlock another door in the House of Mysterious Secrets. You've just heard another journey into the shadows from the Midnight Mystery Archive, where the past whispers and the unknown waits in silence. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your shows. You can also listen and watch on YouTube, where each case comes with visuals that bring the mystery to life. New episodes drop Tuesday and Friday, bringing you deeper into the world's darkest, unsolved mysteries, forgotten crimes, and chilling disappearances. Until next time, keep your eyes open and your lights low. Some stories aren't over. They're just waiting to be found.